The day my credit card was declined at the grocery store, I felt something break inside me, not because I could not pay, but because I realized my own son had decided to no longer deserved control over my life. He had been watching my spending, judging my choices, and quietly using my money for himself. In that moment, standing there with strangers behind me, I understood that betrayal does not always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people you raised, loved, and trusted with your whole heart. That was the day I stopped being just a mother and started fighting for my dignity. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 68 years old, and I live in a small white house near the coast of Sarasota, Florida. 2 years ago, I became a widow after my husband, Harold, passed away from heart disease. We had been married for more than 40 years, and for most of my adult life, I had never imagined a world without him in it. When he was gone, the silence in our home felt heavier than any sound I had ever known. It was not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that reminds you every single day of what you have lost. In the beginning, I barely knew how to move through my mornings. I would wake up before sunrise, lie in bed, and listen to the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. Eventually, I learned to get up, make coffee, and step onto the porch barefoot, letting the cool wood ground me. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers from my small garden. It became my way of reminding myself that I was still alive, still capable of finding comfort in simple things. My days slowly settled into a routine. I watered my plants every morning, speaking to them softly as if they were old friends. I painted in the spare bedroom that Harold once used as his office. The walls were covered with unfinished canvases, sunsets, and quiet streets and faces I had imagined. In the afternoons, I read novels or biographies in the living room, curled up on the sofa we had bought together decades earlier. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals and watched the sky turn shades of orange and pink over the water. The house itself felt like a living memory. It had white wooden walls, blue shutters, and a small balcony that overlooked the street and the distant sea. Wind chimes hung near the door, singing softly whenever the breeze passed through. Harold and I had chosen this place when we were still young enough to dream without fear. Every corner held a piece of our story, and I refused to let it become just another empty building. I was not completely alone. I belonged to a local women's club for seniors, where we met once a week to talk, laugh, and share stories. I also volunteered at a small community center, teaching basic painting to children from low-income families. Watching their faces light up when they created something beautiful reminded me that I still had something to give. I had 2 children. My son, Brian, worked as a real estate agent and lived nearby. My daughter, Laura, was a nurse in Colorado. Laura and I spoke on the phone once a month, sometimes more when her schedule allowed. Brian visited more often, bringing groceries or fixing small things around the house. I was proud of them both, even if our lives had grown different over the years. More than anything, I valued my independence. I never wanted to be seen as fragile or helpless. Harold had always taught me that dignity mattered, especially as we grew older. I held on to that lesson tightly. I paid my own bills, managed my home, and made my own decisions. Looking back now, I realized there were small signs even then. Brian began asking more questions about my health and my routine. He suggested I rest more, slow down, accept help. At the time, I thought it was love. That first year after Harold's death, my life felt calm, steady, and predictable. I believed I was safe in my quiet world by the sea. I did not know that this peace was only temporary. I did not know how quickly everything I trusted would begin to change. If you're still watching and starting to sense something is not quite right, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Because what seemed like simple concern was about to turn into something far more disturbing. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. After Harold passed away, Brian began coming by my house more often. At first, I welcomed it. His visits felt like proof that I was still important in his life, that I had not been forgotten in my quiet little home by the sea. He would bring fresh fruit, check my porch light, and ask if I needed anything repaired. I told myself I was lucky to have a son who cared so much. But over time, I noticed small changes in the way he spoke to me. His voice became more careful, more serious. He started watching me instead of simply listening. When I mentioned going out with friends or buying new art supplies, he would pause, as if silently calculating something. I brushed it off, thinking he was just being protective. Then the questions began. He asked how much I paid for groceries each week. He wanted to know my utility bills, my phone plan, my insurance. He commented on the donations I made to the animal shelter and the community center. He even asked about the price of my paint and canvases. Each question was polite on its own, but together they felt like an inspection. Ashley soon joined in. When she visited with Brian, she would casually bring up money and housing. She talked about how expensive coastal living was becoming. She mentioned friends who had sold their homes and moved into smaller places. She praised retirement communities and shared articles about simplifying life after 65. Her words were always wrapped in smiles, but they carried pressure. Slowly, the conversation shifted. Brian began suggesting that I let him help with my finances. He said it would be safer if he could see my statements. He offered to organize my bills online. He talked about how stressful money management could be at my age. Each time he framed it as concern. Each time I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach. I did not want to offend him. I did not want to seem ungrateful, so I smiled and nodded, even when something inside me resisted. At night, I sometimes lay awake wondering if I was being stubborn. I asked myself if other women my age had already handed over control to their children. I wondered if my desire for privacy was selfish. Grief had left me uncertain of myself, and doubt crept in easily. Some days, I even questioned my own memory. Had I forgotten a bill? Had I misplaced paperwork? Was I really as capable as I believed? Family dinners became uncomfortable. Brian would glance at my purse when I paid for takeout. Ashley would comment on the brand of wine I bought. Their jokes had sharp edges. I laughed along, pretending not to notice. One afternoon, Brian asked if he could review my bank statements, just to make sure everything looked right. He said it was for my protection. He also suggested that I share my online passwords with him, in case of emergencies. I hesitated, but he looked genuinely worried. Wanting to reassure him, I agreed to limited access, telling myself it was temporary. That was the first time I felt something slipping out of my hands. I remembered a conversation I had once had with Harold, years before he died. He had warned me that money changed people, even those who loved you. At the time, I had laughed and told him he was too cynical. Now, sitting alone in my living room after Brian left, I felt a quiet unease settle in my chest. A voice deep inside me whispered that something was wrong. I ignored it. I chose comfort over caution. I chose peace over confrontation. And without realizing it, I took my first step toward losing control of my own life. If you're still watching and beginning to feel the tension building, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're with me, because the next moment changed everything and exposed a shocking betrayal I never saw coming. Now, let's move on to Chapter 3. That morning began like so many others in my quiet life. I woke before sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat by the window watching the light spread slowly across the ocean. After breakfast, I made a short list of errands in my notebook. I needed groceries, art paper, and a birthday card for a friend. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt unusual. I remember thinking how grateful I was for the simple rhythm of my days. By late morning, I drove to a small market near downtown Sarasota. I picked out fresh vegetables, bread, and a bouquet of daisies. At the register, I placed my items on the counter and slid my credit card across, smiling politely at the cashier. She ran it once, then frowned and tried again. The screen flashed red. "I am sorry, ma'am. It is not going through," she said quietly. My face grew warm. People were waiting behind me. I checked the card, thinking maybe I had handed her the wrong one. She tried again. The same message appeared. Embarrassed, I reached into my purse and paid with the small amount of cash I kept for emergencies. I left the store feeling unsettled, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. In the parking lot, I called my bank. After several minutes on hold, a polite representative finally answered. She told me my account had been restricted at the request of an authorized user. When I asked who that was, she gave me Brian's name. My chest tightened. I had not requested any restriction. I had not even been informed. Before I could process what I had heard, my phone rang. It was Brian. He spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. He told me he had canceled my card because I was wasting money. He listed my donations, my art supplies, and my occasional trips as proof of irresponsibility. He said he was only trying to protect me. He said I could not be trusted with unlimited access anymore. I listened in silence, feeling smaller with every word. I had raised this boy. I had worked extra shifts to pay for his college. I had stayed up nights worrying about his future. Now he was speaking to me as if I were a careless child. After the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. My coffee had gone cold. My grocery bags remained unopened. That afternoon, I logged into my online banking account. I began reviewing every transaction from the past 6 months. At first, everything looked familiar. Then I noticed several payments I did not recognize. They were large, regular transfers to a credit card account in Brian's name. My heart began to pound. I searched further and realized the truth. He had been using my money to pay off his personal debt, month after month, quietly, without asking. While telling me I was irresponsible, he had been draining my account to cover his own mistakes. I felt sick. Betrayal burned in my chest, followed by anger and deep sadness. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. Part of me wanted to call him and demand answers. But another part, the quietest and strongest, began to see the pattern clearly. The questions, the monitoring, the pressure, the restrictions. This was never about protecting me. It was about control. I thought of Harold and his belief in independence. I thought of the promise I had made to myself after his death, that I would live with dignity. Sitting alone at my table, bank statements spread before me, I realized something had changed forever. I was no longer just a grieving widow trying to keep peace. I was a woman who had been betrayed, and I knew deep down that I could not ignore it anymore. If you're still watching and feeling the emotional impact of what just happened, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me, because what I discovered next would completely change how I saw my own family. Now, let's move on to Chapter 4. That night, After discovering how Brian had been using my money, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of waves and the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. Every few minutes, my mind replayed his voice, calm and confident, telling me that he was protecting me. The memory made my stomach twist. I felt foolish for trusting him so easily and ashamed for not questioning his behavior sooner. Sometime before dawn, I got up and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in Harold's old sweater, the fabric still faintly carrying his scent. As I watched the steam rise from the mug, I remembered a conversation we had years ago, long before he became ill. We had been talking about retirement and savings, and he had looked at me very seriously and said that money could change people, even family. At the time, I had laughed and told him he worried too much. Now, those words echoed painfully in my mind. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop and logged into a bank account I rarely checked. It was a private account Harold had set up in my name alone. I hesitated before typing the password, as if opening it might somehow make everything worse. When the balance appeared on the screen, I felt my breath catch. The number showed more than $1 million. It was the result of decades of careful investments Harold had made in engineering firms and long-term funds. He had never spoken about it openly, choosing instead to keep it hidden for my protection. My thoughts drifted back to the hospital room during his final months. He had been weak, his voice often barely above a whisper, but his mind had remained clear. One afternoon, while sunlight filtered through the window, he had taken my hand and told me that the account was meant for me alone. He had asked me to promise that I would never let anyone take control of it, no matter how well-intentioned they seemed. I had promised without hesitation, not fully understanding how important that moment would become. Later that morning, I called Nancy Brooks, my closest friend and a retired accountant. I told her everything, from the canceled card to the secret payments. She listened quietly, then told me, without hesitation, that what I was experiencing was financial abuse. Hearing those words out loud made the situation feel suddenly real and frightening. Nancy urged me to contact a lawyer and gave me the name of Daniel Price, a respected attorney in town. At first, I resisted. The idea of bringing legal action against my own son felt unbearable. I worried about gossip, about family divisions, about ending up completely alone. But as Nancy spoke, I realized that staying silent would only allow the situation to grow worse. 2 days later, I walked into Daniel Price's office. The room was quiet and orderly, with shelves full of law books and framed certificates on the walls. He greeted me kindly and listened without interrupting as I shared my story. When I finished, he explained my rights in clear, simple terms. He told me that I could revoke Brian's access, document my mental competence, and protect myself legally. As I left his office, my heart was racing. I was terrified of what lay ahead, of the confrontation that seemed inevitable. But beneath the fear, I felt something new growing inside me. It was determination. For the first time since Harold died, I was not just surviving, I was choosing to stand up for myself. And I knew there was no turning back. If you're still watching and wondering how far this situation could possibly go, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're with me. Because what happened next crossed every boundary and pushed me into the fight of my life. Now, let's move on to chapter 5. A few days after meeting with Daniel, I went back to the bank and changed everything. I removed Brian's access, reset my online passwords, and added extra security to my accounts. The manager personally confirmed that no one else could view or touch my finances without my written permission. Walking out of the building, I felt a brief sense of relief, as if I had finally locked a door that should never have been open. That peace did not last long. By the next morning, My phone was filled with missed calls and messages from Brian. His tone shifted rapidly from confused to angry to desperate. He accused me of not trusting him. He said I was overreacting. He reminded me of everything he had ever done for me. Each message carried the same underlying demand: give him control back. I did not respond. Silence felt safer than words. 3 evenings later, just after sunset, I was washing dishes when I heard the front door open. At first, I thought I had forgotten to lock it. Then I saw Brian step inside, followed closely by Ashley. He was holding the spare key I had given him years ago for emergencies. My heart began to race. They had not called. They had not asked. They had simply let themselves in. They walked past me as if they owned the place. Brian moved through the living room, glancing at shelves and tables. Ashley drifted toward the hallway, peering into rooms. Neither of them asked permission. Neither of them explained why they were there. I stood frozen, gripping the edge of the counter, feeling like a stranger in my own home. They began opening drawers and flipping through the folders on my desk. Papers I had carefully organized were scattered across the table. When Brian entered my bedroom and started searching through a cabinet, something inside me cracked. That room had been my private space, my refuge after Harold died. Watching it be invaded felt unbearable. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ashley holding her phone at an odd angle. The screen was glowing. She was recording me. I understood immediately. She wanted to capture my reaction. She wanted proof that I was emotional, unstable, confused. She wanted ammunition. Instead of shouting, instead of crying, I forced myself to breathe slowly. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. Quietly, I reached into my pocket and activated the recording app on my own phone. If they were collecting evidence, so was I. After several tense minutes, Brian's attention shifted to his tablet. He had left it on the table, unlocked. While he argued with me about trust and family, emails began appearing on the screen. I glanced down and saw messages between him and a law firm. The subject line mentioned guardianship and financial oversight. My blood ran cold. He had been planning this for weeks. He was trying to have me declared legally incapable so he could take control of everything. When they finally left, slamming the door behind them, I sank onto the sofa and sobbed. My house felt violated. My heart felt broken. The boy I had raised was now my greatest threat. But through the tears, something solid formed inside me. Resolve. I called Daniel immediately and told him everything. He listened carefully and instructed me to save every recording, every message, every document. What had happened was trespassing. It was harassment. It was evidence. That night, I sat alone in the dark, staring out at the ocean. I knew then that this was no longer a family disagreement. It was a battle for my freedom. The morning after Brian and Ashley forced their way into my home, I woke up feeling as if I had not slept at all. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Every small sound made me tense. When the floor creaked, I imagined footsteps. When a car passed outside, I wondered if it was Brian coming back. For the first time in my life, my own house no longer felt safe. I moved through my routine slowly, distracted and uneasy. I checked the locks twice. I kept the curtains half closed. Even making coffee felt different, as if I were performing ordinary actions in an unfamiliar place. The sense of violation lingered in every room. My phone continued to light up throughout the day. Brian sent message after message, shifting between anger and false concern. Some warned me that I was making a mistake. Others hinted that people might question my mental health. He wrote about courts and doctors and doing what was best. None of it sounded like love. It sounded like pressure. I tried to ignore the messages, but they followed me everywhere. While watering my plants, I remembered Brian as a little boy, chasing butterflies in this same yard. While folding laundry, I recalled helping him study for exams. Those memories made my chest ache. Part of me wanted to forgive everything and pretend none of this was happening. Part of me wanted my son back, even if it meant surrendering pieces of myself. But another part of me, the part that had survived loss and loneliness, refused to disappear. That afternoon, I began organizing everything. I created folders on my computer and in my desk drawer. I labeled dates. I saved recordings, screenshots, bank statements, and emails. I wrote down every incident in detail, building a clear timeline of how things had escalated. It felt strange to turn my own life into evidence, but I knew it was necessary. 2 days later, I went to see my physician for a cognitive assessment. Sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by strangers, I felt exposed and embarrassed. I had never doubted my own mind before. Answering memory questions and solving simple problems felt humiliating, even though I knew I had nothing to hide. When the doctor finally told me that I showed no signs of impairment, I felt both relieved and angry. No one should have to prove their sanity just to keep their freedom. I met with Daniel again that week. We reviewed my documentation and signed additional affidavits. He arranged for notarized statements and strengthened the legal protections around my accounts and property. Every signature felt like another step away from my old life and another step towards something uncertain. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating in my social circle. Friends asked vague questions. Some became distant. I sensed that Brian had been talking. Being misunderstood hurt more than I expected. I had always valued my reputation as a calm, reasonable person. Now, I felt watched and judged. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I finally accepted what I had been avoiding. My relationship with my son might never be the same. The future I had imagined, filled with family holidays and shared memories, was slipping away. I cried for that loss. Then I dried my tears and made a decision. I stopped responding to Brian. I blocked his number temporarily. I focused on my health, my routines, my friends. I reclaimed control of my schedule and my space. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There would be no quiet return to normal. From this moment forward, I was fighting for my life as I knew it. If you're still watching and standing with me through this difficult decision, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me, because the next chapter would bring everything into the open and decide my future forever. Now, let's move on to chapter 7. I woke up before dawn on the morning of the hearing, my heart already racing. For a long time, I lay still in bed, staring at the pale ceiling, trying to steady my breathing. The sound of the ocean outside my window was calm and distant, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I forced myself to get up, shower, and dress slowly, choosing a simple navy blouse and gray slacks. I wanted to look respectful, capable, and strong, even if I did not feel that way. The drive to the courthouse felt longer than usual. Every red light gave me too much time to think. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I rehearsed everything that might happen. By the time I parked, my stomach was in knots. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, reminding myself that I was not doing this out of anger, but out of necessity. Inside the building, the air felt heavy and cold. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches, pale walls, and a raised desk where the judge would sit. Daniel was already there, organizing his files. He nodded at me reassuringly, and I took a seat beside him. Across the room, Brian and Ashley sat together. Brian looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. Ashley avoided my eyes, pretending to scroll through her phone. Seeing them like that stirred memories I wished I could forget. For a moment, I almost stood up and walked out, but I stayed. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The formality of the proceedings made everything feel unreal. Legal language filled the air, words about jurisdiction and evidence and procedure. I listened carefully, afraid to miss anything. Then Daniel began presenting my case. He laid out the bank records showing unauthorized payments. He played portions of the recordings from the night they entered my home. He displayed screenshots of messages filled with pressure and manipulation. He explained the guardianship documents Brian had prepared. Each piece fit into a pattern that could no longer be denied. As the judge reviewed the files, another truth emerged. Brian's financial records were examined. Statements revealed heavy personal debt. Investment reports showed massive losses in cryptocurrency schemes. Nearly $400,000 had vanished in risky trades. His desperation suddenly made sense. He had not been protecting me. He had been trying to save himself. The judge asked several pointed questions. Brian struggled to answer. Ashley shifted nervously, contradicting herself more than once. At one point, her voice cracked, and she lowered her head, unable to continue. The confident woman who had once filmed me in my own home now looked frightened and exposed. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My legs trembled, but my voice remained steady. I explained how it felt to have my privacy invaded, my judgment questioned, my dignity stripped away. I spoke about my marriage, my independence, and my right to make my own choices. I did not insult them. I did not raise my voice. I simply told the truth. The judge listened carefully. After a long pause, she summarized the facts. She spoke firmly about boundaries, abuse, and responsibility. She condemned Brian and Ashley's actions and granted legal protections that limited their contact with me. Her words were clear and final. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by sadness. I had won, but it did not feel like victory. When the hearing ended, I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight. The air felt warmer. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment. Something inside me had shifted forever. I was free, but I was also changed, and I knew that the hardest part was still ahead. When I returned home after the court hearing, the house felt strangely quiet, not the peaceful silence I had once cherished, but a hollow stillness that echoed through every room. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for several minutes, unsure of what to do next. The battle was over, yet my body and mind had not caught up with that reality. I felt drained, as if every emotion I had suppressed for months had finally demanded its price. The first few weeks were difficult. Sleep came in short, restless fragments. Some nights, I woke up convinced I had heard footsteps outside. Other nights, I lay awake replaying conversations and imagining different outcomes. My appetite faded, and I often forgot to eat until late afternoon. Recognizing that I needed help, I began seeing a counselor recommended by Daniel. Speaking openly about fear, betrayal, and grief slowly helped me rebuild my sense of stability. One of the first practical steps I took was strengthening my home's security. I replaced every lock, installed motion sensor lights, and had security cameras placed at the front and back entrances. I upgraded my alarm system and learned how to monitor everything from my phone. At first, these changes made me feel paranoid. Over time, they gave me peace of mind. Each click of a locked door reminded me that I was in control again. With safety restored, I turned my attention to purpose. I reopened my small art classes at the community center and expanded them into a formal program. Using my savings, I created a modest foundation that provided free supplies and lessons for seniors, and disadvantaged children. Watching people rediscover creativity after years of neglect became deeply meaningful to me. At the same time, I began writing about my experiences, not for publicity, but for understanding. Putting my story on paper helped me make sense of everything that had happened. Laura came to visit in early spring. Seeing my daughter walk through the door filled me with relief and gratitude. We spent long afternoons talking honestly, sharing regrets and hopes. She apologized for not recognizing the warning signs sooner, and I assured her that none of this was her fault. Our bond grew stronger than it had been in years. Gradually, my world expanded again. I joined a support group for older women rebuilding their lives after trauma. I attended community lectures and charity events. I met people who understood without judgment. Loneliness loosened its grip on me. I also reorganized my finances with the help of a trusted advisor. We created clear budgets, updated my estate plans, and established firm boundaries about access to my accounts. For the first time, I felt confident that my future was protected. Joy returned slowly, in unexpected ways. I traveled to a coastal painting retreat. I walked barefoot along quiet beaches at sunrise. I filled my home with new artwork and fresh flowers. Each small pleasure reminded me that life was still generous. Most importantly, I learned to release guilt. I stopped questioning whether I should have done more for Brian. I accepted that love does not require self-destruction. Forgiveness, I realized, begins with forgiving yourself. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sky fade into deep purple and gold. The ocean whispered in the distance. I felt calm. For the first time in a long time, I was not merely surviving. I was living again. If you're still watching and ready to see how this journey finally ends, please comment number 8 below to let me know you're with me. Because what happened next would reveal the true cost of betrayal and the real meaning of freedom. Now, let's move on to the final chapters. I first learned about Brian's downfall through Laura. She called one afternoon, her voice hesitant, as if she were afraid of reopening old wounds. She told me that his situation had grown worse than anyone expected. When I hung up the phone, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, staring at the sunlight on the floor. I felt no satisfaction, no sense of revenge. Only a heavy sadness settled in my chest. Brian had lost his real estate license after several clients filed complaints about dishonesty and financial mismanagement. Word spread quickly in our small professional community. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. Listings disappeared. Opportunities dried up. The career he had built over 20 years collapsed within months. His reputation, once polished and confident, became stained by rumors and official records that could not be erased. Not long after that, Ashley filed for divorce. According to Laura, she blamed Brian for reckless spending and hidden debts. Their marriage, already strained by pressure and secrecy, could not survive public disgrace and constant financial fear. Lawyers became involved. Arguments over money and responsibility turned bitter. Eventually, they separated completely, leaving behind a broken household and 2 deeply disappointed people. Their house was the next casualty. Missed mortgage payments led to foreclosure proceedings. Within weeks, a notice appeared on their door. They were forced to sell under pressure, losing most of their remaining equity. Brian moved into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the comfortable neighborhood he once proudly showed off to clients. Soon after, the letters began arriving. At first, they were polite. He wrote about regret and reflection. He admitted to mistakes and poor choices. He spoke of wanting to rebuild. Gradually, the tone shifted. He mentioned bills, rent, and mounting debts. He hinted at how much temporary help could mean. Each letter blended apology with expectation. I read every one carefully, and I answered none. Turning away from my own child was the hardest decision I had ever made. Some nights, I cried quietly, wondering if I was being cruel. I remembered the little boy who once held my hand at the beach, afraid of the waves. I remembered cheering at his graduation. Those memories did not disappear simply because he had betrayed me. But I also remembered fear. I remembered being recorded in my own home. I remembered being treated like an obstacle instead of a mother. Boundaries were not punishment. They were protection. Not everyone understood that. At church and in social gatherings, I heard whispers. Some people said I was cold. Others said money had changed me. A few avoided my eyes altogether. I learned to carry myself with quiet dignity and let misunderstandings pass. Only those who knew the truth mattered. One afternoon, months later, I saw Brian at a grocery store. He stood in the checkout line ahead of me, thinner and more tired than I remembered. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He looked as if he might speak. I looked away, not out of anger, out of acceptance. That evening, I walked along the shoreline, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. The sky was soft with fading light. I thought about rescue, about sacrifice, about love. Sometimes, loving someone means refusing to save them from themselves. And sometimes, choosing peace is the bravest act of all. On the evening of my first art exhibition, I arrived at the small coastal gallery 2 hours early. The building stood just a few blocks from the ocean, its wide windows reflecting the soft glow of sunset. Inside, white walls waited patiently for the stories I had painted over the past 2 years. I walked slowly from frame to frame, straightening crooked edges, wiping away invisible dust, and checking the lighting one last time. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that this moment represented far more than artwork. It represented survival. Each painting carried a piece of my journey. There were quiet beach scenes filled with calm blues and grays, portraits shaped by longing and resilience, and abstract patterns born from confusion and healing. As I studied them, I remembered the nights I had sat alone in my studio, unsure whether I would ever feel whole again. Now, those fragments had become something meaningful. Soon, familiar voices filled the gallery. Friends from my support group arrived first, followed by neighbors, former students, and members of the community center. Laura stood near the entrance, smiling proudly as she greeted guests. When she hugged me, I felt the warmth of unconditional support, something I had once feared I might lose forever. People lingered in front of my paintings, asking thoughtful questions, offering sincere compliments. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Later in the evening, I was invited to speak. Standing beneath soft lights, I looked out at faces filled with kindness and curiosity. I spoke quietly about creativity, resilience, and the importance of honoring oneself at every stage of life. I shared how rebuilding confidence had been more difficult than rebuilding finances, and how setting boundaries had saved me. I encouraged other women to trust their instincts and protect their dignity. My voice did not shake. My message was clear. That night, after everyone left, I returned home and wrote a final letter to Brian. I told him that I forgave him, not because his actions were acceptable, but because I refused to carry bitterness any longer. I wished him strength and clarity. I did not include money. I did not offer rescue. What I offered was honesty and peace. Sealing that envelope felt like releasing a weight I had carried for too long. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how light my heart had become. Anger no longer defined my thoughts. Regret no longer shaped my decisions. I had learned that forgiveness does not mean reopening wounds. It means choosing freedom over resentment. My understanding of family had also changed. Family was no longer defined solely by blood. It was defined by respect, safety, and mutual care. It was Laura's steady presence, Nancy's late-night phone calls, my friends' unwavering encouragement, and the students who trusted me to guide them. These relationships nourished me in ways I had never expected. For much of my life, I had defined myself as someone's wife and someone's mother. Now, I was learning to simply be Margaret, a woman with dreams, boundaries, and value beyond the roles she played. What I had endured reshaped my philosophy of life. Love should never require surrendering control. Age is not weakness. Independence is not selfish. Boundaries are acts of courage. Respect begins with self-respect. One quiet evening, I sat alone on my porch, watching moonlight shimmer across the water. The air was cool and the world felt gentle again. I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I had become. To anyone reading this who feels diminished, ignored, or manipulated, know this: your voice matters. Your choices matter. Your life belongs to you. I did not lose everything. I found myself. Life has a quiet way of teaching us its most important lessons through pain, loss, and difficult choices. Sometimes, the people we trust the most become the ones who challenge us to discover our true strength. Through struggle, we learn that dignity is not something given to us by others. It is something we must protect ourselves. Independence is not selfish. Boundaries are not cruel. And self-respect is not something to apologize for. True love does not demand control, sacrifice of identity, or silent suffering. It honors freedom, honesty, and mutual respect. Every ending carries a beginning, and every hardship holds the seed of renewal. When we choose courage over fear and clarity over comfort, we open the door to a life built on peace and purpose. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories.